Welcome to What Drives You with your host, Mike Gourdet. Human solution consultant from Seattle, Washington. It is now time to sit back, buckle up for the show that drives the asking question of what drives you. And now your host, Mike Gourdet.
Welcome to episode 3 of What Drives You, the show about why we do the things we do. Today, we're going to continue our discussion on what we've been building on the last couple of episodes. The first episode, we talked about some of the crazy behaviors we're seeing as a result of the uncertainty that COVID has created in our social climate. And then last episode, we talked about egocentrism and how that creates our reality through our perceptual lenses. Last week, we talked about egocentrism and how that creates our reality through our conscious brain. And today we're going to continue that, talk a little bit about the conscious and the unconscious. That's the way the brain works, and we're going to talk about how the brain makes decisions. But first, you may have seen or heard of the analogy of the consciousness being related to an iceberg, where you have a small portion on the surface of the water and then a larger portion below or beneath the surface. So that's a fairly good analogy for how the consciousness, unconsciousness parts of our brain works. You know, the top piece above the water, that would be our consciousness. Our consciousness is a small piece of our total awareness, I guess, if you will. And then below the surface is the unconscious, and that's the biggest piece. I think it was a couple of years ago, I was reading, it was an article or a study or something where, I think it was an article, that neuroscientists think that while that analogy is good for representing that concept, the unconscious is much, much more vast than that image represents. So, and that's really exciting. I don't know if you really enjoy this kind of stuff, but that's really exciting because we don't know why the brain does a lot of the things that it does. You know, at one point in my career, I worked at a sleep lab because I was so interested in this stuff. And scientists don't even know exactly why we dream. You know, we have theories, of course, but we don't know exactly why. And so the study of the unconscious is this vast, it's almost like outer space. It seems like sometimes it's infinite, which is really exciting. But let's talk about heuristics. That's the way the brain makes decisions. I know that may be kind of a letdown. You know, it comes in like a lion and leaves like a lamb. But we're going to talk about how the brain makes decisions. And I'm going to reference a couple of books here. One is, I read these books a few years back. I'm not sure when. One is called Blink by Malcolm Gladwell, and the other is called Thinking Fast and Slow. And I can't remember the author's name, but he was a Nobel Prize winning economist. And it talks about the way the brain makes decisions. And that would be mostly the unconscious part of our brain. So think about that for a second. Our consciousness, or that piece that's above the water, that is how we determine where we are in space. It determines, you know, we have our thoughts, we have our emotional feelings, we have short-term memory. So we have this piece of reality that informs us of where we are, and it can't take a lot of information. So there's called the rule of 7, or the magic number 7. That theory, it basically says that we can only accept 7 plus or minus 2 bits of information at any given moment before we're overwhelmed. And I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but you know, over the summer I went out to go mow my lawn, And, you know, when I do that, I have my headphones on, I'm blasting music and I'm enjoying myself. So I go out to start the mower and the mower won't stop. So I'm getting a lot of information about that. And I'm trying to figure out why the mower won't start, and I can't think because of the music, so I have to take the music out. That's, I don't know if you've ever experienced that. I know there's a meme out there that says something to the effect of I can't if you can't see what's going on, turn your music down. That's a good example of how outside stimulus can overwhelm our conscious brains, because we can only accept so many pieces of information at a time. Whereas with the unconscious, even though we don't really know, the unconscious might be infinitely available to all information. That's some of the theory. But at any rate, we make our decisions there generally. We can reason through a decision, but what happens in our conscious brain is it makes very quick decisions based on small pieces of information. Basically, the only information that we have available, it'll make a decision based on that information alone, and that's called thin slicing. And back to the books, Blink talks about how uh, this has positive effects. Now, this is um, called, you know, we call it various things like intuition or leaps of leaps of judgment or whatever. Uh, and it talks about these leaps as positive ways of gaining knowledge. Now, on the other hand, thinking fast and slow, it's more of a cautionary tale about using that type of system. So let me get into that a little bit. Our brain works on a heuristic model, and heuristic is a it's a fancy word for shortcuts. And so it takes this information and it makes decisions only on the information available, and it creates a decision as fast as it can. So it tries to shortcut as much as it can. A good example of that is if you look outside right now and you see, what do you see? You see trees, you might see houses or cars. And that's an example of how this system works. You know, you look outside and you see the representations of these things. And unless you're a botanist or you're really into cars, you really don't see a lot of individuation there. You just see trees, or you see grass or greenery or cars. And that's sort of how we represent the world around us, so that we don't have to spend time exerting a lot of cognitive process on individualizing or individuation of those things that we're seeing. That gives us an ability to move through our reality without any resistance. So we make decisions on that. Now, why would we do that? Well, if you think about all the stuff we've been talking about previously, the brain exists to protect you, so it has to make decisions as quickly as possible in case there's a threat. So as a predicting machine, the brain is looking for input that looks for threats, and then it acts on it. And it does this through an unconscious process, which we don't often know that's going on. That's one of the interesting things about this. Your brain is largely automatic, so it's only the conscious part, or the new parts of the brain, if you will, that create these conscious events. So we're going through our day, we're making decisions quickly because that's how our brain protects us. Now, this is where this thin slicing concept comes in, and how intuition is described. And if you look at thinking fast and slow, it talks about how we have a lot of things in our unconscious that create error messages, basically. And these are biases, beliefs,
values. Basically, it's our perceptual lens. I talked a lot about that, I think, in the last episode. Our perceptual lens is a layering of these different pieces, aspects, conditioning, experiences, beliefs, values, biases, and those reside in the unconscious. So if you look at the unconscious, you look at it as sort of a data repository. It's like a huge library in some instances. And while it's running your body, it's also storing up these things. It stores long-term memories. It stores experiences, conditions. That's where your beliefs are, your values, movement, muscle memory. All these things reside in the unconscious. And the only real problem is that we don't have very good recall of this information. There's a bridge between the two, between the conscious and the unconscious, and that bridge is kind of a small bridge. So a lot of information can't travel across that bridge at any given time, if you think of it in that manner. So when we dig into our unconscious, we don't have access. We can't just go in there and shine a light like in an attic and look around, because there's a lot of stuff that's there, and we are moving. We are basically looking for specific information. So a lot of times we make decisions with our unconscious, and then we create the justification for that decision with our conscious mind. Let's talk about these biases. Okay, so it's very simple. It's a very simple process that can get us into trouble, and these are where the error messages occur. One of the easiest ways of thinking about this in terms of what's going on in our national scene right now is the racism. From a strictly biological sense. Now, I'm asking you to sort of take any and all judgments away, because we're talking about a biological process right now. We're not talking about all the stuff that we've put onto it, and I'll get to that in a minute. From a strictly biological sense, I've already mentioned this a couple of times. Anytime we meet somebody, our brain is going to go into alert mode and is going to start looking for things to determine whether that's a friend, an enemy, or a potential mate. But we're going to take that out as well. We don't need to think about that at the moment. So really what it's looking for is differences and similarities. Why? Because same equals safe and different equals danger. In the sense that we do that, the first thing that our brains can do is physical features. We see physical features. And anytime we see differences, it goes in the potential danger column. Okay, so if you remember, if you watched the last episode, and I talked a little bit about this, we're plugging in information or bits of information into each of these columns and deciding how that balance weighs out so that we either become a friend or we determine they are an enemy, or that we just or we're just indifferent to them. Okay, that's sort of our default. But the first thing that we see is, of course, what? Our bodies, our skin color, our hair color, our gender, or gender representation, however you want to look at that. And our brain starts to delineate what goes where. So there's no right or wrong here. This is just how this works. What we've done over the course of human history, through our cultural biases, through our social rules, through all these other different social processes, we have taken information and placed it inside that label, right? So in this case, we're using a different skin color. We have placed information in that skin color, almost like it's a folder on a computer. So when I look outside and I see trees, that's the same thing that's what I've done. I see trees, or I see different colored people. And
depending on what I'm looking at, I have a whole file of information that's been placed there by social evolution. Okay. That's where we get the problems, because over time we've created these labels, and we do this all the time. We have a need to control everything. So labels is one of the things we do. And labels are basically vampiric in nature. They take power away from stuff. So if I'm going to pack information in there, that becomes how I view those aspects when I see them. I take that entire folder and I place it on that person. That's what stereotyping is. And again, we do that because that's how our brain processes information. We get into trouble when we've created all these additional value-laden labels that fit into that piece. Are we tracking? So how do we fix that? Well, this is where the conscious piece comes in. Our conscious mind has power enough to influence what's going on in the deep ocean of our unconscious. Unfortunately, and like I said, this bridge is small, so that change can be very slow. That's one of the reasons why we have therapy or therapy models, because in a lot of therapeutic models, we're looking at engaging the unconscious in order to create change. So, and it's pretty murky out there. We don't always know. For instance, if you were a baby and you got stung by bees and you now have a seemingly unfounded fear of bees, you may have no recollection or no knowledge of that experience as a child. Your unconscious knows it. And so forevermore from that moment on, it's determined that bees are a threat and you need to be wary of them. And here's how this creates a problem for us, because as a child, you were stung. You don't know that. But every time a bee comes around you, you suddenly get your threat level up. Now, when we get our threat level up, we start exuding hormones. We get all this stuff dumped into our bloodstream, and it can be sensed by other creatures, bees being one of them, right? So when you get a lot of anxiety, which is fear, when you start to be afraid, the bees can sense that. And when you're afraid, what do you think the bees do? They become afraid. And what's their system doing? And it's getting ready to go into attack mode or basically sting you. So what we have someone who is stung by a bee as a child, and then they get random stings throughout their life, and maybe they have a belief that they attract deadly bees into their area, and that they always get stung by bees. Now, this is what we call a self-fulfilling prophecy. And if you can see how that works, you're tracking with me. And we do that with all these things. We do that with all of our experiences and knowledge. We create these packets of information that when we see certain similarities, it creates certain sensations in our body, whether that's a threat or a safety thing, and we react. So the connection here is that the brain influences the body's biochemical processes or physiology, and the opposite happens. So our physiology can affect our brains. I know this is a very complex topic, and just track with me a little bit here. I'm trying to take a lot of information and packing it down to chewable morsels, if you will. And it does, when you simplify a process, it does leave out details. And it's exactly what I'm talking about right now. Because when you look outside and you see trees and that's all you see, it takes a conscious effort to see all the details on some level. Why is this important? Well, again, this is how we affect change. This is how we understand what's going on. We have to, 9 times out of 10, our conscious mind makes a decision, and then our conscious mind starts to justify why we made the decision. What we can do is stop that process from happening. It's not we can't necessarily stop the initial reaction, but what we can do is slow that down, and instead of acting on that reaction, we can start putting in different influences that change it. And sometimes that change can happen over time, or sometimes it can happen instantly. With the bee example, we can, if we can acknowledge that we have the phobia of bees, we can start acknowledging how to change that. We can even theorize that that's what happened as a child, but that doesn't matter. What really is important is that this happens, and we can affect change so that instead of becoming afraid every time a bee comes around, you have no reaction at all. This is how change occurs and influences that unconscious. Basically, your conscious mind is influencing the unconscious mind to change the program that you run whenever you see a bee. Do you see how this is important in everything that I've been talking about so far? If we are reactive, and that's one of the big issues right now. In fact, that's one of the reasons why I'm starting this podcast. I'm working on the other projects that I'm working on. I've relaunched a website. I'm doing a lot of things because there's so much uncertainty right now that I think there's no time like the present to talk about this stuff, to get people to understand a little bit more about what may be going on outside their world, so that they can calm that uncertainty down enough to let the executive functioning, or our conscious minds, rewrite our behavior. And this is how this works. It's a hard process. It's a long process. It's a process, but it does work. And that's what today's message is about, if you will, is that your brain makes decisions very quickly. And sometimes that intuitive leap is great. Sometimes that intuitively is not great, especially when you're getting error codes. And we all have these same types of aspects running through our system. We all have we all have biases. We all have experiences, values, beliefs, and those are the command codes, if you will, to determine where those sensations that we're getting flows, right? So in the sense, we're getting all this information into our system. It filters through our perceptual lens, which is the layering of these command codes, and goes all the way down to that pleasure pain center, where our brain determines what it's going to mean ultimately. And then once that's informed, we move. We either move towards it or we move away from it. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. Thanks for hanging with me. I hope that helps. I know it is very complex. I understand that. I hope that I've explained a little bit better for you, and hope that you can take some of these ideas and start applying them. Stay with us. We're going to move on to our next segment when we get back, and I'm going to take some coffee, and I will see you in a minute. And thanks for coming back. We have today with us Kimberly Smythe, who is a staff scientist at Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center, which is world-renowned. Hi, Kimberly.
Hello, how are you?
Not bad. How are you?
Okay, thanks for having me today.
Yeah, how is life in COVID land for you?
Pretty quiet, although my commute is really, really short considering that it's in my bedroom.
Yeah, Yeah, there's a lot of people that's having that same fun. So
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I am a staff scientist at Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center, focusing on looking at the cell population within the tumor microenvironment. So I'm using cutting edge technology really to look at how the cells are interacting with each other and with the tumor so that we can try to figure out therapies or even to figure out who should go on what therapy based on what their immune cell population looks like when they are first diagnosed.
Wow, that's quite a mouthful.
Yes.
Yeah. So for those who don't have any idea what you just said, can you put it in regular person language for us?
Yes. So if you think of whenever people have talked about their red blood cells and their white blood cells, the white blood cells are the ones that are usually involved with or are exclusively involved with helping to keep you healthy, right? Helping to get rid of diseases and such that come in. And so I'm looking at those cells in particular and tumor cells. So in particular, cancer tumor cells.
Okay. And how long have you done that?
I've been working in the cancer immunology field since 2004 when I first started at Fred Hutch. I actually came in as a research technician 1, which was just ground level into a research lab. And I did work for a few years on HIV vaccine. And, but I am now back in cancer immunology and found that that's really where my passion lies.
Okay. So you just mentioned passion. Can we assume that this is your passion, or do you have something else that you would rather talk about as having a passion on this segment?
No, this is totally my passion. I love what I do.
Okay, well, the name of the show is What Drives You, so that's the question I ask is what drives you? What's behind that passion? Can you tell us about give us your story?
So there's actually 2 factors that are involved. The first is just being raised in a strong work ethic. I grew up in a Department of Defense family. My father, like everybody else, started as a private in the Army, and when he left, he was retired as a sergeant major.
Okay.
My mother started as a clerk typist and ended as the director of IT for the Pentagon. So those are pretty big shoes to fill, and there were certainly no slackers in my house. Both of them rose in the ranks as not for sake of being power hungry, but for sake of wanting to do good work and to help others to do their work, and kind of a bit of an altruistic helping others. And so that then goes into the second factor, which really drives me, and that's helping others.
Okay.
So that started out when I was a little kid. I wanted to create my own town that was off of wind power and solar power and what have you, and not for sake of creating a commune, but for sake of helping others to be in a safe space, have a safe place to live. And then by the time I graduated high school, I was on track to get into strategic intelligence, which really was the aim to help to create a safe country, right? So growing up in the Cold War in a DoD family.
Yes, I know.
But
I do that too.
yes, and especially since we're from the same town, amazing.
I know.
So but my first year of college, my minor was actually psychology, and that's because I was interested in mental health and why do people think the way they do. And it's not so much as a, existential why, but as a, what are the processes in the brain that create these types of reactions, right?
That's awesome.
So the fact that it would hopefully help me with my career was a bonus, but the real interest was because this was just a totally separate interest for me.
So how did you
and
get
then
from
after my first year,
So how did you get from strategic intelligence to the biogenetic community?
After my first year of college, life happened. So, and then when I got back to school, strategic intelligence was now totally off, and I really developed my desire to get into medical research. So, starting out with wanting to know the processes of the mind turned into the processes of the body. And as a more holistic thing. And then while I was going to school at Virginia Tech, I found that I was, zeroing in a bit more cellular processes and things like that. So by the time I graduated from Virginia Tech in 2003, I had 2 science degrees, and my entire goal in life was to do medical research. I had no idea beyond that other than medical research.
Nice.
And then I came out to Seattle.
Oh, did you aim for Fred Hutch, or was that sort of a fluke of nature?
It was a fluke of nature, and I am so grateful. One of the nice things here that also helps with my motivation and going forward is that everybody here at Fred Hutch is dedicated to accomplishing the goal of curing cancers and HIV and these other diseases and such. And so working in an environment where everyone is really supportive and wanting to work together to accomplish the goal is a huge bonus.
Cool. All right. That's great. Why would a young girl be interested in STEM, which obviously you're right in the mix of that? What would you say to somebody, what would you say to your younger self to get them interested in that area of education and career tracks?
So aside from the fact that, we could say we need more girls in STEM, but that's not really the motivating factor to get more girls in STEM, right?
No.
It's really getting kids in general, right, into down this path of, in order to create a better future, right, we need to figure out how to help people and to help each other. And STEM really goes towards all of that, whether it is helping people to play video games to take their stress off at the end of the day, right? Or to figure out how are we going to get to Mars, or how are we going to figure out how to cure cancer? I mean, all of these different components have the end goal of trying to help humanity. And that's a pretty lofty goal.
Yes, that is a pretty lofty goal. I think that's something that you're correct in thinking that we need just more people in general looking into this area. So, all right, cool. So
and
what?
It's just fun.
And what?
And it's just fun.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I'm not a hard science person, but I study a lot of different things, so it's pretty it's wide ranging. So, okay. So that's pretty much it for this segment. Thanks for joining us. One of the questions I do ask is if you have you ever looked at something that somebody was doing and ever wondered, why did they do that? I mean, you just told us you were interested in the processes of thinking earlier. So have you ever just sat and watched somebody do something crazy or something and just go, now, why did they do that?
Yes, I have to admit it tends to be more of the physical endurance things. So when you have these people doing crazy stunts or climbing up Kilimanjaro or things like that, I've always wondered, what motivates them, because that's so outside of my wheelhouse.
Are we talking about adrenaline junkies or people who are attempting to defy death type of thing? I guess those are kind of the same.
Yeah, I think they're connected.
They're very connected, but you got the adrenaline junkies would be the persons that jump out of airplanes and things like that. But then you've got this other group that they want to climb K2 and Mount Everest and things like that.
Yeah,
I don't know if I'd
I've
classify
quite
that as a.
understood those. Yeah.
All right.
Yep.
Well, I don't know that I could give a quick, simple answer, but I sure will think about it and probably stick that in one of the upcoming episodes. So thank you very
That would
much
be
for
interesting.
joining. Yeah. You think?
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for being on the show today, and you have the good rest of your weekend.
You too.
Thanks. Bye-bye. Okay, we're back, and it's our question of the day. And this is a simple one, but it's a big one. It's from Ian in Portland. And Ian asks, why do people lie? Well, you see how that's a very simple question. It's also a very big question. So why do people lie? Well, I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying this, but lying is one of our social glues. Okay, we all lie. We have to in order to maintain social bonds. I lie, you lie, we all lie. In fact, some studies suggest that within the first 20 minutes of a conversation, you've already lied up to 10 times. Now, what am I talking about? I'm talking about small, simple social program lies. Hello, how are you? I'm fine, even if you're not. If you watched the last episode and you saw the question today was oversharing, I talked about how that violates social rules. So one of our ideas here is one of the things that we're trying to do when we're socializing with people is not violate each other's rules. And we have to do that by circumventing our urges, which in effect is a lie. And we call those white lies. Now there's a big spectrum of lies. There's white lies, the social programming lies, all the way up to complex destructive lies. Okay. But why do we do that? Well, we lie because it either gets us something we want or pleasure, or it keeps us from something that we don't want or pain. In lieu of the socialization, we do it socially so that we can gain acceptance from the other person, which is our need. It's one of our biggest needs as human beings is connection to other people. We also do it so that those people don't find displeasure with us, because when we're talking from a human perspective, if somebody finds out that we've done something wrong and we feel that as rejection, even if they don't know it yet. And we don't want that. We don't want any form of rejection, so we lie. Quite frankly, we look at it through the lens of punishment. We don't want to get punished, so we don't want to experience, but punishment is simply a form of rejection anyway. So we lie in order to A, get acceptance from people, and B, avoid rejection. That's as simple as we can put that. Now, understand that when I'm talking about all these concepts that I talk about in the show and the questions and everything, we're taking a very complex system and trying to winnow down to a digestible answer. Just keep that in mind. Why do people do destructive lies? Well, that's a larger conversation, but suffice it to say that I talked about this, I think, in the first episode, where we make decisions. We typically do the simplest thing first, which goes along with everything I've been talking about. And the simplest thing that we can do first is either not make a decision, which is making the decision, or make destructive decisions. It's easier to make a destructive decision than a constructive decision, because constructive decisions mean we have to go into our unconscious, or we have to go inside of ourselves and forestall what we want to do. That's in a simple sense, that's being polite to somebody who's being rude. We don't want to do that on a primitive basis. We want to meet aggression with aggression. That's sort of a part of our makeup, our mirror neurons. So that's a really big question, Ian. Thanks for that. I hope that answers part of it at least. Just understand that when we lie, we're either trying to get something or we're trying to avoid something. Thanks for joining me here today. I hope the information that I provided was helpful. If you do have some questions for me, please contact me at mike@whatdrivesyou.net. I love to hear your thoughts and questions. Join us next time when we will continue this discussion. Have a great day. Bye-bye.